Hey, so I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I realized something kind of wild about Pokemon. There are items out there that basically nobody knows exist. Like, these items were in the games, they were real, people could find them and use them. But somewhere along the way, the whole Pokemon community just forgot they ever happened. And I mean completely forgot. We're talking items that are so obscure that you could ask 1,000 Pokemon fans and maybe one person would know what you're talking about. And that's kind of fascinating to me, you know? Because it tells this whole story about how Pokemon evolved, what worked, what didn't, and what Game Freak just quietly left behind in the code. So today, we're going through every forgotten Pokemon item I could find. And I mean, we're starting with the stuff that maybe rings a bell, and then we're diving so deep into obscurity that I'm genuinely curious if you've heard of some of these. Let's go. Alright, so the place to start is probably the type gems from Generation 5, which is already kind of wild because I feel like nobody talks about these anymore. So basically, what were type gems? They were held items, one for each type. And when a Pokemon holding one used a move of that type, that move got a 50% damage boost. One time. Then the item disappears. They had all 17 types in black and white. All of them. But by the time Generation 6 rolled around with X and Y, Game Freak just removed them. Well, except for the normal gem. They decided the type gems were too disruptive for competitive play, so they axed them. And now, hardly anyone remembers they were ever a thing. That's the kind of forgotten item we're dealing with. Then you've got Sacred Ash, which is one of my favorite examples because it's forgotten for kind of a funny reason. Sacred Ash fully heals your entire party, your whole team. Full health, all status effects gone, everything. Sounds amazing, right? Well, the game only gives you one per playthrough. One. And because it's so good, basically nobody ever uses it. You know that feeling? Where you have something so valuable that you're too scared to actually use it? It just sits in your bag forever because you're waiting for the right moment that never comes. Yeah, that's Sacred Ash in a nutshell. So it's forgotten, not because it was bad, but because it was too good. Now here's something kind of nostalgic. The Hoenn flutes. The blue flute, the red flute, and the yellow flute from Ruby and Sapphire. These were actual status cures made from volcanic ash, and you could use them infinite times. Wake a Pokemon up, blue flute. Snap it out of confusion, red flute. They were actually really useful. But then Generation 3 ended, and suddenly we had berries that did the exact same thing except you could only use them once. And somehow, berries stuck around. And the flutes? Forgotten. Game Freak moved on, we all moved on, and the flutes became this relic buried under 25 years of Pokemon. But I want to get into some really weird competitive items before we jump into the truly obscure stuff. Because there are these niche-held items that basically only competitive players know about. And honestly, even most of those players have probably forgotten about them. Iron Ball is a good example. It's an item that cuts your speed in half, which sounds terrible, right? But here's the thing. It also makes you vulnerable to ground-type moves, even if you're a flying type. Which means if you're using a trick or a fling strategy, you can trick an Iron Ball onto a flying opponent and suddenly they're grounded. Ring Target is similar. It makes your Pokemon vulnerable to moves that normally wouldn't affect it, like making a Ghost type vulnerable to normal moves. And Sticky Barb? Well, that one damages your Pokemon every turn, but you can use Trick to pass it to an opponent's Pokemon. These items are so niche, so specific to certain competitive strategies, that almost nobody in the casual community even knows they exist. And I bet if I asked people on the internet what Ring Target does, I'd get blank stares. Alright, so let me take you back to Generation 2 for a second, because Gen 2 is a treasure trove of forgotten items. Like seriously, Gold Leaf and Silver Leaf. Those two items existed. They were real. You could hold them, you could look at them in your bag. But here's the catch. The only way to get them was to trade Pokemon from Generation 1 to Generation 2. That's it. And once you had them, you could only sell them. That's all they were good for. You'd get some amount of Poké Dollars, and that was it. They weren't held items, they weren't battle items, they were literally just money with extra steps. So of course nobody cares about them. They were pointless then, and they're completely forgotten now. Then you've got Polka Dot Bow and Pink Bow, which both boosted normal type moves. Why would you need two items that do the exact same thing? Well, By Gen 3, they just consolidated them into Silk Scarf. So these two items got completely replaced, and now they're dust. And here's a wild one, Brick Piece. It was an item held by Machop when you traded it from red and blue into gold and silver. It sold for 25 Poké Dollars. 25. But here's what makes it interesting. Brick Piece is actually a remnant of a deleted side quest in Vermilion City from red and blue. There was supposed to be construction happening there, and this item was tied to that storyline. They cut it before the games came out, but the item stayed, floating around as this tiny hint at something that never made it into the game. It's like an archaeological artifact embedded in the code. Oh man, Berserk Gene though. This item from Gen 2 boosts your attack by 2 stages, but makes you permanently confused. Power at a cost. Except here's the really wild part. Berserk Gene never got a proper sprite. The item exists in the code, you can hold it, it's in your bag, but there's no actual image for it. It's a ghost item. It was never officially shown before it got removed. Something so obscure it never even got visual representation. Now, I want to talk about the berry graveyard. In Generation 2, you had berries. In Generation 3, those same berries came back with completely different names. Berry became Oranberry. Goldberry became Citrus Berry. Mystery Berry became Lepa. Game Freak rebranded the entire lineup and moved on. So Gen 2 berries are forgotten, not because they were removed, but because they were transformed into something else. But then you've got Lychee Berry, tied to Mirage Island in Emerald, which only appeared with a 1 in 65,536 chance. You could play Emerald your entire life and never see it. And Landsat and Starf berries were even more impossible. You had to get all 7 gold symbols in the Battle Frontier. Only the top 1% of players ever did that. These berries are basically mythical. Oh, and Enigma Berry, originally a placeholder for e-reader cards in Gen 3. You know, that thing that failed everywhere except Japan. Enigma Berry was supposed to unlock through e-reader cards with names like Pumpkin Berry and Drash Berry, but the e-reader flopped outside Japan, so most Western players never got these. Then in Gen 4, they redefined Enigma Berry into something completely different. Now nobody remembers what it originally was. And Michael, Kustap, Jaboka, and Rowap berries, event-only berries that were distributed through specific events and then just vanished. For like 15 years, these berries were basically extinct. I bet you didn't even know they existed. Now, I'm going to blow your mind, because we're talking about something removed entirely from the games. Mail. Mail was a whole item category in Generations 2 through 5, and then Game Freak just deleted it in Generation 6. Entirely. Gone. So, if you played X and Y or anything after, you probably don't even know Mail existed. But it did. It was real. In Gen 2, you had Eon Mail, Music Mail, and Morph Mail, which was actually a mystery gift exclusive item that most people never got. And then in Gen 3, you had Mirage Mail and Blue Sky Mail, which were even more exclusive. They were only available if you had the mobile Game Boy adapter in Japan and you connected to the Pokemon Communication Center, which was a Japan-exclusive service that's been shut down for over 20 years. So basically nobody outside of Japan has ever seen Mirage Mail or Blue Sky Mail. They're myth. They might as well not exist. But here's the wild part. Brick Mail. This is probably the most unobtainable mail item ever. Brick Mail was only on a specific Heracross that was distributed through the Global Trade Station, the GTS, for exactly 11 days in 2007. 11 days. And it was Japan exclusive, so unless you were in Japan with a Nintendo DS connected to Wi-Fi at the exact right time and got that specific Heracross, you never got Brick Mail. Most people have absolutely no idea this ever happened. And this is my favorite mail fact, you had Mosaic Mail in Generation 4. Mosaic Mail was this rainbow-colored mail item that was beautiful and unique, and it was never distributed. It exists in the code, you can data mine it, you can see what it looks like, but it was never given to players. So Mosaic Mail is technically the only mail that's completely unobtainable in legitimate gameplay. It's the shiny mail that nobody can ever get. Alright, now we're getting into the truly impossibly obscure territory. GS Ball. A key item only available in Japan through the mobile system GB. With it, you could catch Celebi. But GS Ball never made it to Western versions of Pokemon Crystal. For 17 years, Western players couldn't encounter Celebi in Crystal at all. It was this mythical item in a parallel dimension, only accessible to Japanese players. And then there's Azure Flute, which is in my opinion one of the saddest forgotten items on this entire list. Azure Flute was programmed into Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. It let you encounter Arceus, the literal god Pokemon. But it was never obtainable during normal gameplay. Junichi Masuda actually said in an interview that Azure Flute was too confusing for players. So he locked it away. For over a decade, this item just sat dormant in the code, waiting for an event that barely happened. Most people have no idea it even existed. Now, we're in the deepest part of the obscurity iceberg, Godstone. An item programmed into black and white, supposed to be a counterpart to Lightstone and Darkstone for catching Kyurem. It was coded in, ready to go, but never actually used. Never distributed. Why? Nobody knows. The item is just there. A ghost feature that became real, but never became accessible. That's genuinely haunting. So here's the thing, right? All of these items, the forgotten ones, the impossible to get ones, the ones that were removed, the ones that never got a sprite, the ones locked behind impossible requirements. They're not just boring game design trivia. They're actually kind of beautiful in a weird way. They're evidence. They're proof that Pokemon is this living, breathing thing that's constantly evolving. Every feature that made it into the final games, every item you can find and use, there are dozens of others that got left behind, deleted, remade, locked away. Pokemon is this massive archaeological site, and these forgotten items are the artifacts that tell the story of how it all came together. And that means even a game series as massive as Pokemon is still learning, still changing, still leaving things behind because they don't work. And that's not sad, you know? That's just what creation is. You try things, some work, some don't, and the ones that don't, they become these tiny mysteries buried in the code. And that's the legacy of Pokemon. Not just the things that succeeded, but everything that got forgotten, everything that almost was. And I think that's kind of beautiful.